You're listening to the Unwritable Rant podcast with your host, author, and occasional misanthrope, Juliette Miranda. Go to theunwritablerant.com and you can subscribe on iTunes or connect with the show on Facebook and Twitter.
Well, hey there, y'all. It's Juliette Miranda, and you are listening to episode 110 of the Unwritable Rant podcast. I have two stories to share with y'all today about going natural and contested fires. But first, before we get to that storytelling, we gotta do a little bit of bourbon drinking. So what do you say, y'all? Grab a glass, fill it up, and let's say cheers. Oh, bourbon, you do me so good. Y'all, today I am drinking Willet Pot Still Reserve Bourbon. I've heard from a lot of you about the Willet, and I figured it was about time that I got some of this in my glass. I get your curiosity, I do, because this has a very eye-catching bottle. That being said, however, I'm going to put it right out there. I fucking hate this bottle. It's shaped like a pot still, which, clever, but is a gigantic pain in my ass to pour from. Plus, and this is one of my gripes about bourbons, there is no age statement on this bottle, and I cannot for the life of me find a mash bill. Now, this being a bourbon, not being able to find any of this information is not necessarily a red flag. Because we know that as a bourbon, it's going to be at least 51% corn and aged about 4 years. Still, I was all set up to hate this stuff. But I'll be honest, I gotta say it, it's a good bourbon. The flavor is absolutely classic. It tastes exactly like what a quality bourbon should taste like. It's warm, but not overly sweet, and has just a little bit of apple in it. But what you're gonna taste a lot of is black pepper and cashew. And then at the back end, it finishes with just a little bit of burnt orange. There's not a lot of oak to this, which personally I miss, but then again, I'm a chick who enjoys chewing on wooden pencils. So that said, it's not that big of a deal. But I am going to give you this little bit of advice about the Willet. Drink it straight up. Now, if you need to mellow it out a little bit, which I understand and appreciate, don't put it on ice. Now, maybe this is just a me thing, but when I tasted this bourbon on the rocks, it had something of an astringent sort of flavor to it. I just didn't like the flavor profile cold. So do this instead. Just add a couple of drops of room temperature bottled water to it. It's going to make all the difference in the world, I promise you. Give it a try. Otherwise, though, good stuff. And today, I am drinking in honor of Hugh Hefner. He had a significant impact on my life in so many ways. Now, it's partly professional, because I will always admire what he accomplished as an editor and as a publisher. But for me, it just goes way deeper than that, because Playboy magazine had a big part in shaping who I am as a person. I've talked about my feelings for Playboy way back in the early days of this podcast, but there's so much more to the story than what I shared then. So, since we're all comfortable with each other now and we've curled up with our bourbons, I want to give you the full story and, in a small way, just pay a little bit of a tribute to Hef. And like all good stories, this one starts with Sunnin' and Doritos. I swear, y'all, nothing smells more like my teenage summers than that sweetly noxious scent. It's funny, really, because every time I hear certain songs from the 80s, like Janet Jackson's When I Think of You, I have an almost total sensory recall. Buddy Holly has the same effect on my dad, although he tends to recall grass clippings and gunpowder, which I kind of envy in a way. He gets to revel in the scent of adventure at the sounds of a pioneer in rock and roll, whereas I am forced to inhale cheesy, naive desperation every time some stupid synth-pop song plays. Damn the 80s. And XM radio for forcing me to remember them. Because there is very little about that decade that could ever be so refreshing to remember least of all my youth. I spent the summer of 1980-something slathered in copper-tone oil, with my nacho cheese-stained fingers eagerly flipping through the latest issues of 17 and YM magazines. That's where I got the idea to start using Sun-In, and at the time it seemed like a good one. My brownish red hair really never did me any favors back then. It just kind of hung in this stringy sort of wall down my back and was eternally boring and lifeless. And that's where Sun-In came in. The brand promised life-changing hair color brightening through heat. All you had to do was spray it on your hair and either go out in the sun or take a blow dryer to it, and boom, you would have gorgeous highlights. Well, I was sold. So rarely did I ever leave the house without multiple spritzes of that stuff singeing my scalp. So much so that it wasn't long before Yahoo Serious decided to capitalize on my look. Although really, I guess it didn't help that I also took a crimping iron to my hair most days. It could have been worse. I could have given in to the temptation to get a perm, or maybe cut my own bangs, which was the big thing. And my friend Renee did both that summer. And it was so unfortunate. She was desperate for help, so the two of us spent an entire afternoon at the drugstore near my house, searching for a barrette or a bow or a headband, anything that she could use to wrangle that nightmare into place. I, of course, talked her into buying a bottle of Sun-In as well. And needless to say, we're no longer friends. My efforts might have been a little misguided, but you could never say that I didn't try. I layered my neons, I cuffed my Esprit pants, flipped my pink Izod collar, and somehow I still came out looking as though I had been run over by a street sweeper. It forced me to dread my family's annual fall getaway. Not because I didn't want to go, but because I had a litany of fashion-related fears. My family was about to pack up the car with fishing gear and brownies and explosives and booze, and head to a place that I only knew as the country. And all I could do was panic. Sadly, 17 magazine never really explained how to actually live in your clothing. And clearly, white pants are definitely not made for bike riding. And there was no way in hell my hair was getting near lake water. And I seriously doubted my teal mascara was going to hold up under regular mistings of DEET. Not that I had anyone to impress, mind you. The country was several acres of nature-ridden land that my grandfather owned somewhere way, way south of Chicago. He built a 4-bedroom house off a lake, fashioned a beach, and opened it up to my entire extended family of aunts and uncles and cousins, where we would all just gather and celebrate. We'd grill and hike and go for rides in the back of my grandfather's giant lawnmower, and at night my cousins and I would sneak wine coolers out of the icebox while my dad blew things up. But at 12 years old, I had no idea how I was going to do any of those things. I felt uncomfortable enough in my own skin, so that shedding the layers of makeup and goofy clothing that I wore as kind of an armor, well, doing that was unthinkable. I'm sure my mother likely regretted ever buying me that first copy of 17, because the morning that we were supposed to leave, she was trying desperately to get me to put on a pair of old shorts or a pair of jeans, anything that would make me comfortable. But I was a tween. I didn't have words for the confusion or the discomfort that I felt. All I had was a page ripped from my fashion Bible with a picture of the girl that I longed to be. Even if that meant wearing leggings, a denim skirt, oversized button-front shirt, and a fucking bolo tie into the woods. My mother relented to my pleas to keep the ridiculous outfit on, but only with an agreement to a compromise. That I would pack a bag with jeans and a t-shirt, just in case. I figured that was fair enough, so I added my Walkman, a couple of magazines, and a bottle of Love's Baby Soft perfume, and I was on my way. My cousins were already running wild when we arrived. Their eyes widened as I gingerly navigated my way up the gravel driveway to the house. It was the farthest thing from a runway as I could get, but I maintained what shaky composure I had until I made it to our bedroom, where I threw my bag on the bed in frustration. This whole being the cool 17 kind of girl sucked. My entire family was outside readying gear to go fishing, and there I was left to roam the house alone. 17 could cure my pimples and instruct me on applying eyeshadow, but it offered nothing to cure my loneliness. I found my way into one of the bedrooms in the back of the house. We never really used that house for much outside of the summer, but over the years it collected more and more of the family's excess stuff. So that particular room seemed to serve more for storage than sleeping quarters, and with nothing better to do, I started rummaging. Most of the stuff I found was junk. Stuffed animals, old clothing, the usual nonsense from growing families. But a box on the dresser caught my eye. Piles of magazines spilled out, their glossy covers beckoning to be opened. I brightened a little bit because there was nothing like the thrill of discovering a new magazine to make my day. I grabbed a stack and stretched out on the bed with a bag of Doritos at my side. They were the snack food of the gods as far as I was concerned, then and now, and I never read anything without them. There was just something about that combination of a good magazine and the salty tang of cheese and crunchy corn that equaled bliss in my little tween world. And for the first time all morning, I actually had hope that my day might improve. Little did I know how much. A few pages past the cover, and I knew instantly that this was not the typical fashion magazine. My biggest clue, of course, was that none of the women were wearing clothing. That's right, y'all. I had inadvertently stumbled across an expansive collection of Playboy magazines from the 70s. It was glorious. But here's the thing. What shocked me the most about the magazines was not the lack of clothing. I'd been watching grade B horror movies for years before then, so boobs were nothing new. It was how relaxed, comfortable, and natural all of the women looked. I saw women riding bicycles, diving into swimming pools, and doing all sorts of everyday things without any of the hindrances that were holding me back. Oddly, the women in Playboy just seemed infinitely more relatable to me than any of the silly made-up girls I saw in 17. There were no hindrances, there were no hang-ups. It was just free and fun and natural. And in one unforgettable instant, Playboy magazine taught me the most important lesson of my burgeoning life. That less is definitely more. Cheers from outside the house interrupted my page turning. I looked out the window and saw that my cousin had just caught a fish and was holding it up with pride. Suddenly, that bag my mom had made me pack seemed far less distasteful. And I figured, well, hey, if the women in Playboy can run around outside without the layers of clothing and still look beautiful, so could I. And with my makeup washed off, my hair in a ponytail, and last year's gym uniform on, I ran outside to join my family. They never knew what inspired the dramatic change, but on that particular day, there were no complaints. I snuck several of those Playboy magazines into my bag to bring home, and as soon as I discovered that my local Crown bookstore carried the magazine and had absolutely no qualms about selling it to me, I became a regular reader. To be completely honest with y'all, my interest in Playboy was not entirely innocent, because I totally practiced kissing on those pages just as much as I did my Bon Jovi tour program. Don't laugh. I know I'm not the only one out there who's done that. I would never attempt to explain or rationalize why we're attracted to the things and the people that we are, but I always kind of knew that I had different feelings about women than my friends. Playboy gave me the chance to explore it, and never once made me feel bad about who I was or what I wanted. Ultimately, I came to appreciate Playboy for more than its pictorials. I have, of course, occasionally questioned its editorial direction, and although it makes me sad, I do understand that these days the brand has less relevance in our changing culture. But for me personally, I credit Playboy for giving me the courage to be me, naturally. And hey, it even cured me of my Sun-In and 17 magazine addiction, which did wonders for my adolescence. As for the Doritos, well, you'll have to pry those out of my sticky, dead fingers. I'm raising up my glass to Mr. Hugh Hefner. Cheers, sir. This bourbon. Like I said, y'all, it is great at room temperature. Really, really smooth and easy to drink. So, y'all, here at the Rant Ranch, we have a little bit of a matter between my guy and I. You see, there's a fairly sizable orange-tinted scorch mark on the concrete floor of our garage. And my guy and I are completely unable to agree on how it got there. Oh, y'all, there is always more than one version of a story. And in this particular instance, there are two. Mine and my guy's. But only one of these versions is true. Not too long ago, we experienced something of a delightful Indian summer here in the Midwest. I mean, we're talking days that were more than 100 degrees. It was heavenly. Although I will admit that I both love and hate this kind of weather. I hate it because it's such a fucking tease. And I love it because it gave my guy and I more nights to spend on the driveway drinking like heathens. Which is, of course, exactly what we were doing just a few weeks back. Even after dark, the night was ridiculously humid. And my guy and I were mixing things up that night by foregoing the bourbon in favor of absinthe. Which was, perhaps, our first mistake. The other was a large citronella candle with all three of its wicks lit. It goes without saying that rule number 1 where candles are involved is to place them in a secure area. This place should be free from wildlife and propane grills and wandering feet. And it is a very sensible rule that my guy and I completely disregarded in favor of sitting that oversized flame factory directly on the ground in front of us. And it is here where the discrepancies in our stories begin. To hear my guy tell it, it was the wild flailing of my legs when I decided to attempt a two-step that nearly burned the entire house down. My guy's flair for the dramatic knows no bounds. But to be fair, my two-step is rather abysmal. I keep trying, hoping, maybe that with my optimistic persistence that one day the right combination of booze and music will somehow inspire my feet to do what they should. And maybe that night it was just that absinthe isn't two-stepping booze. I know it wasn't the song. If you can't find the right rhythm to Josh Turner's Why Don't We Just Dance, you might as well just give up all hope. And that would have been good advice for me. When the song kicked in, I have to admit, I may have hopped from my chair. And yes, there may have been some shuffling, maybe a carefree turn or two. But in my defense, it's a fun song. It's very danceable, even if I did look a little bit like Jennifer Grey before she met Patrick Swayze. In my guy's version of this story, my quick, slow was more akin to kick, plow. Because apparently in my sad little driveway dance routine, I bumbled my way right into that candle. Allegedly, it went flying like a football through a goalpost, landing flame-side down on a pile of debris in the garage. My guy, the firefighting superhero of the driveway, claims to have leapt to his feet and bravely clawed his way through smoke and flames, and it was only through his quick thinking that he was able to extinguish this harrowing nightmare of a fire before it could overtake the block. My recollection is slightly different. As you may know from past episodes of this podcast, I am no stranger to fire. Growing up with an absent-minded physicist father has made open flames as common in my life as running water. There wasn't a single household project my dad couldn't turn into a 5-alarm fire, whether it was hanging a painting or building a high-voltage corona ring. But he never called the resulting fires what they were, which was completely negligent accidents, he referred to it as testing the laws of thermodynamics. I don't really know the science behind fire, but I couldn't help but be reminded of my dad's so-called testing that night there in the driveway. That citronella candle was indeed knocked over. How it got knocked over is so totally unimportant that we really don't need to discuss that part. What is important, however, is what happened next. It always takes just a few beats to really process what has happened when you're presented with a potentially bad situation. So when that candle was overturned, my guy and I just sort of stared at each other, mouths open in completely stupid disbelief. But then we both jump up and we're expecting the absolute worst, hoping our home insurance policy is up to date, and suddenly understanding why our neighbors hate us. But here's the reality. There were no flames. There was nothing except a rather large pool of citronella wax oozing its way down our somewhat slanted garage floor. We both giggle in relief when we realize how lucky we were to not be engulfed in flames. So I picked up that empty citronella container and I tossed it in the garbage. Because I'm ready to resume drinking. That's what I do. But my guy, well, he's eyeing that quickly drying and hardening wax river with extreme prejudice. It certainly had made a mess. I will totally cop to that. But to me, it wasn't anything that couldn't be better handled in the sober light of morning. My guy, however, was a little obsessed. I tried to distract him with a fresh glass of booze and conversation, but every few seconds I see him sneaking glances at that pool of wax, and I realize that he is in full-on OCD mode. It takes a great deal to rile my guy, but every so often there's something that just hits his brain in the oh-so-wrong way, and he will gnaw on whatever it is like an overanxious beaver until he's able to resolve it. And by the look in his eyes, I knew. That pool of wax had to go, and there was nothing I could say or do to convince my guy otherwise. Our house is relatively well supplied with general tools. We've got a hammer and a screwdriver and whatever else we may need to attend to minor issues. But I'll tell you, wax is a tricky substance. And this weirdly gooey wax had managed to settle into every single nook and cranny it ran into. We really didn't have anything appropriate to scrape it up with. So my guy just grabbed the first, not quite tool that he saw, a twig, and started digging it through the wax as if it would just magically dissolve it. All he really succeeded in doing was unearthing all the crap that had been jammed into the crevices and mixing it up into the wax. It was kind of like chewing bubble gum after eating popcorn. Completely unproductive and kind of gross. Now, I am stupid with laughter at this point. I suppose I could have helped my guy like a decent, supportive wife, but it was far more fun to watch and offer helpful suggestions like, gee, baby, maybe you should just melt it off. I had made that particular comment in pure sarcasm. And it didn't occur to me that my guy would take the suggestion seriously. So I vanished into the house to pee, never once thinking that I would come back to find him crouched on the ground with a butane lighter in his hands. Oh, y'all, this is not something you ever want to see. Frankly, I think I would have preferred to catch him standing over a dead body with a bloody knife in his hand. That I would have understood and had been better equipped to deal with. But a butane lighter? This thing is tantamount to a torch, y'all. We use it for our cigars because it has a nice, consistent flame and doesn't have any sort of pesky safety lock on it. Which, of course, my guy is taking full advantage of. I can hear that little whoosh of gas as he is waving that perfect flame over the congealed mass on the ground. It was his very own hillbilly science project. Emphasis on the hillbilly and minus the science, that is. Well, he managed to liquefy some of the wax, which gave all the little leaves and twigs caught up in it the opportunity to act like miniature wicks. And the next thing you know, we have a river of flame rolling its way down the garage. And where those flames were headed was anybody's guess. There was a half-empty canister of propane just a few feet away on one side, and a used car battery just starting to show signs of rot on the other. Either, I'm sure, would have blasted a sizable chunk out of our townhome. And in the middle of it all stood my guy, who, at the sight of the flames, tossed his lighter across the garage and was now frantically dancing back and forth, scanning the room for some sort of assistance. Clearly, he had to put that fire out. But how? Tossing our cocktails on it would only enrage the fire gods. And I had long ago used up our fire extinguisher in a freak water heater incident. So that left a large jug of bug-begone windshield washer fluid at his disposal. He wrenched the cap off the jug and sloshed that liquid onto the fire in a manic splash. Well, the waxy fire river was immediately quenched, leaving in its wake a patch of scorched ground flecked with waxy buildup and highlighted by the neon orange stain of washer fluid, which still glows in defiant mockery today, despite my guy's repeated attacks with a scrub brush. Now, y'all are free to believe whichever version of this story that you like. Just do yourself and me one favor. Please, for the love of all the bourbon in Kentucky, don't ask me to join you in a two-step. And with that, I'm going to have a little more bourbon. Hang on, y'all. All right, bourbon. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Unwritable Rant podcast. If you want to get to know me a little bit better and see what the Unwritable Rant is all about, just head on over to theunwritablерant.com. We have some very cool swag that's available if you're so inclined, including quite awesome t-shirts for both guys and girls. You will also find all the ways you can connect with me on social media, so feel free to tweet me, y'all. Give me your bourbon suggestions or just say hi. As for me, I'm going to go find some more trouble. I'll be back next week to share more bourbon-soaked stories with y'all. Cheers.
Go to theunwritablерant.com and sign up to get early access to interviews and new videos. You can hear new episodes of The Unwritable Rant on radiovegas.rocks every Tuesday at 4 p.m. Eastern and on IPMNation.com on Saturdays and Sundays at 6 p.m. Eastern, and hear best of episodes every weekday at 3 p.m. Eastern. And don't forget to connect with Juliette on Twitter at Morning Neurosis.
Girl, you was pretty as a Sunday morning, standing on the corner at Carondelet. What you say we make our way up to Bourbon, a couple hurricanes and a hand grenade, and get blown away, and let the chips fall where they may. If it's all the same, what you say, bon ton relay. Hey, pretty mama, I can smell the gumbo, sweet as taste of honeysuckle on my lips. Good God Almighty, I can hear the trombone. Every heart ought to beat to a rhythm like this. Come a little closer, honey, let me hold you. Nothing tastes better than a bourbon kiss. You can be the flower on my magnolia. Every heart ought to beat to a rhythm like this.